everybody. Welcome to With Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends get together to discuss the events and ideas shaping our uncertain future. I'm your host, Steve, along with my co-host, Zach. What is up?
I got a pile of kittens behind me.
It feels like you need to explain exactly.
It's one of those days, man, like trying to get work, not getting work, and all that stuff. And life is just like, well, no, I wish I had a pile of kittens. Now I do. Also, I have 4 cats. So, 4 cats.
Yeah, see, I don't know what mine would be. It would probably be a warm day that's not hot, but it's like a warm day, but in a cool space.
And a pile of something, but it ain't kittens.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, something just like, a place to relax, like a hammock in the shade of a tree on a warm day kind of thing. But like cats got sharp claws and sharp teeth, and they're cute, but even their hair is all kind of wiry and greasy. It's not soft like an adult cat's.
It's true. Yeah. And they have that milk mouth going on.
Yeah. Of all the babies, cat babies are the fucking worst. Now puppies can be pretty cute. But not when they're real young.
Yeah.
No. Even human babies are fucking awful when they're real young.
Oh, they're
they peak like 18 months in for like 6 months, and then it's all downhill from there. Sorry, kids. I'm just kidding.
Parents didn't want you. It's all right.
Society doesn't either. Now suffer in fucking poverty for the rest of your existence. Yay! All right. So anyway, kind of central theme of the show is that we are entering an uncertain future that is certainly bleaker than the one of our parents' memories, which is why a big theme of the show is that boomers are definitely standing in the way of us dealing with their fucking mess. And speaking of boomers, we got fucking Biden. Is Biden even a boomer? He's probably so old. He's kind of like not even really a boomer, huh?
No, I think he's pre-boomer.
Jesus
I don't know.
Christ.
Let me check. But you keep talking.
He's like 80 something. So no, because my grandpa wasn't a boomer, but he would have been like a very, very young child. So it was basically, he was the front end of the boomer wave. He was a child born around the end of World War II.
Leading the charge.
Yep. When was he born? 38?
42.
1942? Yeah. So by the time he was a toddler, they had all that imperial wealth flowing and all that fucking fossil fuels and an industrial apparatus to produce anything you can imagine with no rules.
Yeah.
Because we didn't implement the rules for another 25 years. Which is fine. I like the rules. I'm glad that we have Clean Air and Clean Water Acts because they're insufficient as is. I couldn't imagine what it'd be like without them.
Well, I seem to remember fiery rivers being one of the big ones.
Yeah.
That got a lot of attention. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, we still have like fucking tons of super fun sites everywhere. There's brownfields fucking all over this country. Most of the fucking country is a brownfield. If it just goes to show, right?
I don't know that term.
Just means like basically like old industrial districts that can't really be redeveloped because the fucking nature of them, toxins, or it might be the thickness of the concrete. Like it becomes economically infeasible to actually clear the lot before you build something new.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah. So they're just kind of brown because they're like, they can't be green spaces, but they can't really be anything else.
Gotcha. Okay.
Whereas some former parts of cities can be like, elevated trains, because they move the train system, but they have old tracks. And they'll turn them into like promenades and shit. So you can like repurpose it. But if there was like a old textile mill that like used all sorts of toxic dyes and the soil is fucking like would be too expensive because it's toxic to move, so it costs a lot of money to deal with it, like to mitigate it.
Right.
Then that would just be a brownfield. They just fucking fence it off and leave it. Okay. A lot of like port areas are like that too. You'll see old warehouse and factory buildings and shit that have just been empty for 30 years, and no one will do anything with it.
All right, new turn.
Unless they can turn it into fucking expensive condos, and gentrify it, put in a microbrewery, a couple tattoo parlors, a dog salon. At any rate, we are going to touch on some foreign policy stuff tonight, specifically talking about the Houthis, because their names come up a lot, and obviously, like, the U.S. is now that we're going to discuss has designated them a terror group. And this stuff with the 3 soldiers getting killed in Iraq yesterday. And now, of course, the drums always beat for war with Iran, but like now that there's like they're a little more justified in doing it than like just drone strikes on bases. Like, I don't know. They'll say they're justified, they're not. But at any rate, this all fits in because the U.S. has been engaged in a conflict with this group in Yemen over the Red Sea. And we're going to discuss why that is and who they are and what the motivations are and where they come from, because I don't think often like all of the details are spread out. And I do think it's important too to provide some context, because too often I see if the U.S. is against somebody, they are obviously the right because the U.S. is wrong on everything. And the U.S. is wrong in this in a big fucking way, which we'll discuss. But it is always important to actually do the research yourself. Because if you look at international relations, I don't think that everybody involved in the State Department is a bad person. I genuinely think most people try to do their job the best and would like the U.S. to have better relations.
Right.
And it's generally the politicians with specific economic interests in mind that, and political ideological as well. Like sometimes it's just like, oh, like they genuinely think like it's a holy war, right?
Right.
So, as we've discussed. So at any rate, we think that that's bullshit. But we also kind of want to understand who people are and what motivates them and why would they do it. So that when you see a headline, U.S. kills 50 civilians by fucking dropping several bombs on this neighborhood they believed to have housed some, arms cache or like some important leader of this group, you have a context of like where this group came from and what they were trying to accomplish. And in all things, we can just say up front that Too Long Didn't Read is that like, that's politics. There's always competing factions. We talk about them all the time. We talk about liberals. We talk about radicals. We talk about like, center conservative, like libertarian conservatives versus like actual like Christian fascists. Like, but coalitions are made out of the various factions. And the Houthis are but one faction in a broader story of the people of that region, which is itself a broad and textured and layered history of people really at a crossroads, because that was the meeting of the Arab, basically Arab and Black, as well as beyond in the Orient and everything, because it's just been a center of fucking trade for like many thousands of years. So it has a pretty layered and textured cultural history as well. And so we want to learn more about it. And then when we actually are able to shoot the poodoo on Wednesday, we're moving to Wednesday. We time to be determined, but probably same time, 9:00.
Yeah.
And we will meet up and we'll finally talk about the trailer to the Bad Batch, which is fucking cool. We'll watch that and talk about it. Way late, but it's okay because I still want to talk about it. And some other kind of news items and stuff and updates on the other topics we've talked about, like the Colorado trying to keep Trump off the ballot and the bullshit the governor of Texas is doing at the border and all that stuff. So we will touch on that Wednesday. And for now, we're off with our first item.
U.S. hits Houthi targets in Yemen with strike fighters, warships, and submarines. The obligatory...
it is bilateral with the UK.
Yeah.
Which harkens back to the history of the Suez Crisis, where Israel, France, and the UK lost. which I think I've already mentioned, and I'll say it again, that I did my senior undergraduate paper on the Suez Crisis.
Let's see. There were strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen in retaliation for about 3 months of attacks on shipping in the Middle East. It was a multi-pronged attack from different attack vectors. Let's see. They don't know how many submarines, of course, because that's the whole point of it. Like, they go out of their way to point that out. At least one submarine. Like,
yes, that's undeniable.
Yeah,
there was at least one involved.
Yeah, we will say no more. Goodbye. Well, they don't want to say it because they could be stretched kind of thin. There's not an infinite number of submarines.
I would guarantee the military is stretched thin. We can continue that topic for sure.
Yeah,
continue. Sorry.
Let's see. Happened in the wee hours of the morning, as it often does. And then, of course, the UK was playing along. It hit airfields, a total of 60 targets at 16 different locations, munitions depot, command nodes, etc., etc. This multinational strike reinforces the international community's commitment to freedom of navigation and against a repeated Houthi anti-ship ballistic missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and cruise missile attacks. If you read some of the reports on it, like, the damage is minimal to ships that are like not even heavily armored or like thickly holed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like not very successful attacks.
Yeah, and I would argue because if you have ballistic missiles, like, missiles are pretty up there.
Yeah.
As far as technologies, like, that's kind of higher end, higher tier hardware. And I think it goes a lot to show that they're not. I mean, I don't know. I'm not on the inside, but you're right. I've heard of ships getting shot, and it seems to be more of a campaign of stretching resources for a prolonged campaign of harassment versus like we actually want to sink those vessels.
Yes,
like,
it does.
They're just trying to disrupt it, not actually kill people.
It's deterrence. Yeah.
And as we're going to cover tonight, it works.
Yeah, it's already working. Otherwise, it wouldn't be firing back at them. Let's see. They say that it was significant action and conducted with every expectation that it will degrade the way that the Houthis are able to launch these sorts of attacks.
They failed because it's continued.
Yeah, it's continued.
This article's, I think, from a week or so ago.
Yeah, I think the 14th or so. Let's see. The Houthi actions have been destabilizing and dangerous. And yeah, as we'll see in a later article, like, it is affecting shipping, large and small. You'll notice that all these countries that are getting involved are like just super big, rich countries that are like, we have very important, shit going through there, and we need it to be able to flow freely, because otherwise we won't make money. Like, that's all this is about. That's got nothing to do with the freedom of trade or anything like that.
Yes, I do understand it, right? And they're like, hey, like an industrial economy, but that's why, like, globalization was, and I don't want to say like it'd be like nativist and say we should have never got or isolationist. I mean, I am in a lot of ways, but I think that, like, I'm anti-globalization for a lot of reasons, and facilitating greater trade among nations is not necessarily one. I think kind of in the law of the sea, you should know that better than me, but I think like free passage is like a huge part of it. The problem is we discussed a couple weeks ago now, because we've had a hiatus and a couple of little hiccups in our production schedule, but we had discussed that, like, the Yemen is a fucking desperately poor country, right? That had to fight a civil war to get rid of a corrupt government, and then has largely been sanctioned and unable to get the resources it needs to rebuild itself and like find some basis of dignified life for its people, right? And they've called it the word, like, during the Civil War just a handful of years ago, it was the worst food security crisis in the region ever, or whatever. It was like a global emergency for how many people were like on the brink of fucking mass death. And these people don't get anything for all of the vast amounts you were talking from China to Europe and onto America or whatever, right? Like all this stuff, India and China, coming from these like larger emerging industrial societies and like passing through that space, not to mention the energy resources passing through it on a daily basis, and they see none of that wealth. So like, I think you're right. It is a conduit for enriching some, while both Egypt and Yemen are desperately poor.
Yep. Let's see. I find it interesting. This is not related to that, but that the U.S. government is still using Twitter.
Yeah, why not?
Like all these years later, all the big changes.
Yep.
So
they're just firing missiles at the shipping lanes in the Gulf of Aden. So the Gulf of Aden is the piece that's there, and then there's like a choke point, and then it's the Red Sea. And then they built the Suez Canal to go from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And that separates mainland Africa, Egypt, from the Sinai Peninsula, which is connected to like the Middle East. And there's actually an Israeli city at that other Gulf. But yeah, so anyway, it is part of the sea geography of that area. It's out closer to the Indian Ocean. So,
yeah. And of course,
I think most of the Red Sea coast is actually like Saudi Arabia on one side, and then like all those little tiny African countries in East Africa, like Djibouti and Eritrea and all that shit, where the U.S. has fucking drone bases and shit.
Yeah,
fucking A.
I was pretty amazed that Djibouti and Yemen are like 15 miles apart.
Yeah, dude, that's why they could, like, geographically, it's a fucking, like, I would not be surprised if the US and UK just decided to territorially take that. And just build a defensive line. Because if anything Russia's been showing here in the last couple of years is that if you just fucking take the good territory and draw a strong line,
nobody's ever going to call you on it.
I mean, you can. I mean, not that no one's ever going to call you on it, but I think that militarily, it's effective. That's what I'm saying. So if they drive them back and make a defensive line to control that, I think that's what'll happen.
I do wonder who controls these other little islands. There are islands that are like smack dab in the middle of that area.
Can you bring a map up?
Oh, they're Yemenis. Yeah, I will.
For sure.
These ones. Yemenis. Yeah, so they got a bunch of little places. They're all
not here. Saying that they have those provisioned, because that would be fairly easy to like lose a lot of assets and people.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't have a strong. I don't think they have a navy. They're a fucking ground-based militia.
Yeah, I mean, like look at the terrain,
rockets and shit. But yeah,
it's like, man, that is awesome terrain. Actually,
I think it's just dunes and shit, bro.
Yeah, dunes and volcanics. It looks like.
Yeah.
Enough of that.
It's fucking wild. Anyway, so that's been happening. Let's move on to the next topic. They have been harassing shipping. Let's talk a little bit more about that, right?
Yeah.
I have more to say. Shipping giant Maersk diverting container service away from the Red Sea. And they are a shipping giant because you can drive across the American West. And this is how I know their name, because I incorporated it one time to be the evil corporation that we worked for in a Star Wars RPG campaign. We just called it the Maersk because it looked like it had a little star. So we just like wrote it in Arabic or whatever, kept the little star. And yeah, we made them one of the villains in the campaign.
Not far from the
that was
trees.
because you can drive across the American West, because you can drive across the American West, especially like parts of Arizona and southeastern California, and you just see trains for miles and miles and miles, just fucking stacked up with those containers, which they come right off the ship and go right onto a fucking train and then go to their destination.
Mm-hmm.
Or to a destination port where it gets broke down to lorries or whatever, fucking big rigs. So at any rate, it's a Danish shipping group. Maersk is diverting its ME2 container service away from the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, rerouting the vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, which is South Africa. The company says in an advisory, the ME2 service links Italy and the Western Mediterranean Sea to the east coast of India and the United Arab Emirates, which is up through the Persian Gulf. So they're going up across the Indian Ocean to India, and then also through the Indian Ocean up into the Persian Gulf. The moves comes amid continued attacks by the Iran-backed Houthis. If you notice, again, watch your propaganda, you will see Iran-backed Houthis all the time. And you know what that sets it up for? Oh my God, these people, I think in this case with this 3 soldiers, I don't know if they're blaming Hezbollah or what, but probably they will, because the attack happened a lot closer to Syria and Lebanon. But at any rate, you always see them say Iran backed. Iran backed. So like one of the questions, or one of the kind of like flagrant moral inconsistencies is this, like, so when Ukrainians kill fucking civilians, right? Do to say, or blow up, they tried to take credit for Nord Stream and nobody bought it, of course. But like, do you say US backed Ukrainian government does X, Y, or Z? No, you fucking don't.
Right.
You don't see it when the US supports other groups either. Right? Like US backed Mujahideen fights Russian, Soviet, or whatever. No. And so that's a intentional editorial decision to include that. It's part of the subtle propaganda. All right, can you scroll down?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that is. Okay, yeah, fantastic.
That's that really short one I was talking about.
Okay. It comes amid continued attacks by the Iran-backed Houthis in the region. So anyway, the moral of the story there is that this constant harassment campaign based on geographic superiority, for all intents and purposes, it's like a perfect choke point for this kind of shit to take place, because then you don't have to be right at the edge of the ocean where like a destroyer's fucking artillery can hit you, right?
Right.
They don't even carry artillery anymore, huh? They use all fucking ballistic missiles.
Carriers?
No. Like some of the smaller, like Green Navy boats, like the
yeah.
Boats that operate closer to shore. It's like battleships and destroyers don't still have fucking big artillery cannons on them, do they?
To be honest, I don't know. I never really saw one where I was docked.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do know that a lot of them can launch Tomahawk missiles. We love those Tomahawk.
I was going to say, basically, missiles replaced most. I guess infantry still use like tanks, mortar units, and like some field artillery stuff, but like the vast majority, like you don't carry a bunch of gunpowder on a boat anymore. You carry like a fucking ballistic missile that uses chemical fuels that are stable until you change the stability. Mm-hmm. Whereas like gunpowder is just kind of unstable all of the time. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not a fucking weapons engineer. I could be absolutely full of shit, but it seems plausible to me.
Well, an important part of the whole, having it blocked is people want to blame someone. They want to blame the Houthis. They like blaming Iran. And then also, Egypt doesn't traditionally like Iran, if I remember correctly.
I don't know. There's a lot of
who profits off of the Suez Canal. So anything that diverts traffic away from the Suez Canal is bad for Egypt.
That's true. Not that it can be great for Egypt either. Because I highly doubt they're fucking funding massive social programs based on the wealth they're getting from the canal.
Oh, I mean, I don't know about all that, but somebody's getting rich. And they're jacking up prices year after year, man, just like everyone else.
Yeah, so onto a Reuters article here, another one on shipping specifically, because it brought something up in my mind. Can you bring that up?
Yeah.
All right, Red Sea shipping attacks pressure China's exporters as delays and costs mount. Scroll. And this was from earlier this week.
Look at that shit.
That's the typical port, dude. It's fucking wild how much stuff gets moved.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to move that on sail ships. You couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like a wooden ship with a sail. And that's a lot of mouths to feed. But it will continue to be a viable means of transoceanic transportation indefinitely, if we want it to be. I hope to go sailing this summer. Okay, for Chinese businessman Han something or other, disruptions to Red Sea freight are threatening the survival of his trading company in the eastern province of Fujian. Han, who exports Chinese-made cars to Africa, imports off-road vehicles from Europe, told Reuters the cost of a shipping container to Europe surged roughly $7,000 from $3,000 to $10,000 in December. So I wanted to especially include this article to emphasize that's a more than 200% jump in the cost of doing it, like that fast, a matter of weeks. It more than doubled the cost of shipping.
233%. Not cool, bro.
Not cool. When Yemen's, I love this, Iran-aligned Houthi movement. They cannot
stop doing it. They can't stop.
I tried really hard, and I don't think that I included a lot of stuff on it, but like the Wilson Center had a bunch of stuff in it, and that's kind of a neocon think tank. And then this was from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I was looking for some kind of more like think tanky source that could provide the fucking receipts for how much support Iran is giving, and I could find nothing. I saw estimates for Iran support of Hezbollah to be about 100 million per 100 million per month. And Hezbollah operates, it's another political faction. They're not evil, right? They're not a terrorist organization. They are a legitimate political faction that's exercising its power in the way that it's able in the space as it negotiates, right? We may not love everything they do, but they're still a legitimate political actor as far as we discuss legitimate political actors, right? And I saw an estimate of 100 million for them. I saw during the Yemeni civil war that just kind of almost wrapped up just a couple of years ago. It lasted, I think, like 6 years or so. That's what I mentioned earlier with the humanitarian crisis, right? The worst humanitarian crisis that the world had seen to that point before Gaza, basically. And we just fucking, our bailouts for the banks keep getting fucking bigger every time there's a crisis, and we just keep having another humanitarian crisis that exceeds the one before it. It's like, oh, this is the hottest day on record until next year when it's the hottest day on record. Or this is the most people who starved to death this year in human history. And like until next year and more people starve, because this is what collapse looks like. Anyway, my point was that I could not find any numbers. I found during the Yemeni civil war, most recently, which the Houthis were a party. This political organization was a party in that conflict as well. And I saw an estimate of $6 million compared to $6 billion, and that's why they say the Houthis, or as they're also known, Ansar Allah, that they had received money from Iran and called them a proxy, because Iran was like, we can give you some assistance because you're hurting one of our geopolitical foes, right? Which would be about the equivalent. So, I mean, even look again to the Ukraine example, and not moralizing on who's right in that situation, although, hint, it's fucking Russia's right. But in the Ukraine situation, how many billions of dollars has the U.S. given Ukraine? Like
too many.
Yeah, Iran gives $6 million to cause Saudi Arabia to spend $6 billion. That's what, a factor of 1,000, right? No, 10,000, because it's no. From 6 million to 6 billion is 1,000. So 1,000 times more money, and the U.S. has given how much to Ukraine? More than 6 billion.
Oh yeah, I stopped counting when it got up.
It
past,
got into the 20s.
Yeah.
Or was it 120 when you stopped counting?
Charge CFR 113 billion.
There you go, close to 120.
Yep.
So back to shipping disruptions. The rupture of one of the world's busiest shipping routes has exposed the vulnerability of China's export-reliant economy to supply snarls and external demand shocks.
Yeah.
Okay. The vulnerability of China's export-reliant economy is also the vulnerability of the European import-reliant economy, or the U.S. import-reliant economy, and also the finance economy that makes money on all of these transactions. The whole financial structure profits at makes something at every single fucking step of the way. It's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate,
I like this one here. Some companies, such as US-based BDI Furniture, have said that they are relying more on factories in places such as Turkey and Vietnam to mitigate the impact of the disruptions, adding to recent moves by Western countries to reduce dependence on China amid geopolitical tensions, and also, reduce reliance on canals. Because if you're already near your target, you don't need to use a very expensive canal.
Yeah, and realistically, I'm surprised they didn't just move them to Mexico. Right? Move the company to Mexico. But really, seriously, it cannot be understated how big of a fucking deal this is. The global industrial economy, this is a small group of people. We're about to learn who they are, who just was decided to adopt. I don't know exactly what their political philosophy is. I've never read their governing documents or anything else they use. I don't know how they structure themselves and how they make decisions. But this is a group that was instrumental in overthrowing, or I don't know, instrumental is the right word, but they were a participant in the conflict to overthrow a government which had widely damaged Yemen's economy, and it's basically a kleptocracy, right? And so they were one of the factions that overthrew the kleptocracy that was installed by a coup. And I didn't get deep enough to find out who did the coups, but I'm probably in the late 70s. It probably was the US, maybe with the UK and France, right?
You're pretty close. I think it was the late 60s.
Was it late 60s? I thought it was early 70s. No worries.
Yeah.
It could have been. But basically a series of coups, and this dude took power and was in power for a very long time. And it was a kleptocracy, and Ansar Allah was one of the groups that, one of the political factions that was fighting against this. Again, remember I said about coalitions? And that's the thing. And that's the genius of fucking Game of Thrones, to completely derail our conversation about this. And maybe not, because it was based on the War of the Roses. So there is a legitimate historical precedence embodied in the core of that mythology. And that's just the fucking factions that win the key, the War of the Seven Kingdoms or whatever. That was all or whatever the first war was. It was everybody being no, he's illegitimate. He's an illegitimate heir. He's an illegitimate heir. Well, he's a legitimate heir, but do we really want him? He's not the right guy. And then it becomes this conflict of all these shifting political factions to figure out who wins the Game of Thrones. And if you don't win the Game of Thrones, you die. Right? That's just that's just kind of the way it works. But very similar here, right? So I think the Houthis aren't necessarily the governing body of Yemen. But but they are still a major political faction. And someone could be like, it takes a Google search. It's like, well, then you look at Google. I'm busy reading these articles and having and thinking nuanced thoughts about things rather than constantly chasing facts. Because history is not facts. History is the interpretation of facts.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you have to absorb facts and you have to think of them in a much larger, deeper context than simply just facts. So anyway, it's interesting. It's hurting China's economy. And I included this article because it crossed my thought that, like, you know, it's been widely admitted that, like, the reason the U.S. basically is like complicit in or helping facilitate Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is because we want a foothold in that region. We talked about this a number of weeks ago, I think, because that's where all the energy is. Really, when you really think about where the energy is, that's the most concentrated source of energy. It's still the easiest to get and of the better qualities, right, than some of the lower sources of energy we can get, like tar sands and shit. And it's like right at like a major sea shipping node. And
right,
it's not controversial to say that shipping by sea is the least expensive way to do it. When you're like, we could ship, you know, a container for $3,000, and now we pay $7,000. Like $3,000 to put a big box full of shit on a boat and take it like thousands of miles. That's a very relatively low cost. I don't know what it would cost to fly it, but it would probably be like 10 or 12.
One hell of a lot more. It takes up so many passenger seats.
Well, they just have dedicated cargo planes. They don't even have seats.
I know.
Oh.
It's a joke.
You have everybody carry a widget.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, okay. So moving on to who the Houthis are. Again, title was supposed to be, and I think at the top of the tracker it said, who the hell are you? And I thought it was a great pun, and then you named it something else, and I was
that's the title of the video.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's just the thumbnail.
Oh, the thumbnail has a different thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, then, fantastic. I stand corrected, and you're the best.
I try.
All right. So the Houthis existed for a while, but the tipping point was again in 2003. What happened in 2003, you might ask? Oh, that's right. The U.S. invaded Iraq, and it radicalized the Houthi movement like it did many other Arabs. The group, also called Ansar Allah, or Supporters of God. And it was something their growth as a movement in the context of that, again, right? Like, it's a political faction. They probably are saying some shit that people are like, I don't know about that. That seems like, that's a little far that direction. Or they might be like, I'm not really ready. That seems too different than what we're doing. And then it wound up being like, they're like, U.S. imperialism is bad. And they're like, I don't know. The U.S. is pretty cool. I have some Levi jeans that my cousin brought me when he was traveling in Europe, right? Like, so I don't think America is that bad. And they're like, America's fucking evil empire and shit. And then America invades fucking Iraq. And then people are like, oh shit, these guys fucking knew what was up from the beginning. And then they go there. I don't know how it happened, but plausibly in my head, that's how it happens. Is that they were just a fucking political faction like any other political faction, and they had an analysis that matched the fucking facts. And that's what we don't have in America. We don't have a political faction that is ringing on those facts. And it's not that we don't. It's just that they are ineffective for reasons X, Y, and Z. They're mostly old. Identity politics controls almost everything on the left. All that shit. We have political factions that are there, but they never can get their words in front because on top of those internal issues they have a problem with, we have a massive, massive, massive propaganda apparatus. It's very difficult to break through because, like, we don't have independent media really at all. There's like a little bit. There's a few 100,000 or maybe a couple million that are tapped into that. But the vast majority of this country is sucking on the fucking tit of corporate media. And that's just a fact.
Yep.
So anyway, sorry, you had a thought.
Oh, good.
Okay, cool. Hezbollah, the Shiite movement in Lebanon, which successfully expelled the Israeli army from the country, became a role model and mentor to the Houthis. Do you notice what that didn't say? And this is from Brookings Institute, by the way, which is like a think tank. I tend to think they're more like centrist, but I don't quote me. They could also be neocon. But this is written to me in a very non-emotionally charged, because they could have said the Iranian-backed Shiite movement in Lebanon, right? Again, to propagandize, but they didn't. They just said it's a movement in Lebanon, not controversial.
They do mention Iran later on.
Expelled Israel, not controversial. It became a role model and mentor. It didn't say their Iranian-backed funding and then Hezbollah helped fucking the Houthis get Iranian money, right? Like they're just like it's international cooperation. So when like the Green Party in the UK or the Green Party in the US, if they come together and do some kind of a joint campaign or something, right? That's just coordinating among various kind of political factions internationally. And international solidarity is a huge part of fucking Marxism or communism broadly. Sorry, I was getting notifications. Iran was a secondary source of support, and it shared a common enemy of Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia was trying to control Yemen's politics because they're neighbors. Something they didn't get a source for, my understanding, is in Yemen's broader history, like they had an oil boom, but their plays ended quickly, and part of that was because Saudi companies on the Saudi side of the border fucking horizontally drilled or diagonally drilled and fucking pumped their oil out faster.
They drank their milkshake?
Like fucking legitimately, they drank their milkshake. And so I don't know the exact, but I know that Yemen had like a short boom in like the late 60s, early 70s, and then fucking it dropped out, because that's what oil wells do, is they max their production in the first like 10% of their life, and then they start declining. So if you got a really big rush right out, it probably is going to decline that like as equally quick. It's just a fucking bell curve, right? Usually a production curve, and sometimes they taper off, like they'll spike up and then linearly decline, but it depends. Anyway, that's kind of what their history is, why part of the reason they didn't enjoy the same in their geology too, but why they didn't enjoy the same as the UAE and the Saudis and all that shit, the oil wealth. It's because their oil plays got fucking depleted pretty quick, because they're also pretty small. The Saudis joined with Saleh, which is the leader of the 30-something-year-old kleptocrat we were talking about earlier, in these campaigns. The Houthis won against both Saleh and the Saudi army, besting them both again and again. For the Saudis, who've spent tens of billions of dollars on their military, it was deeply humiliating, of course. Although we don't seem to suffer the same kind of sense of reservation or humility in the face of blowing tons of money on a losing cause, which we do all the time. We spend trillions of dollars on shit.
Just the cost of doing business, man.
There was very little humiliation in the American government when, like, the scenes from fucking us leaving after, like, we literally were there 20 years and we're like running away, right? Like, with people being like, "Don't leave us here. We helped you.
Yeah,
like we tried to be your friend." And now you're just leaving us here to basically get murdered by the opponent political faction that's pissed off. We were helping you. Yeah, exactly. The Arab Spring came to Yemen in 2011, as it came to much of North Africa and the Middle East. The Houthi movement was one part of the wide national uprising against Saleh. So it's one faction, primarily concerned with advancing the narrow interests of the Zaidi community, which we skipped down to here, but they are a sect of Shiite Islam. So they are a smaller practitioner group within a, less than a larger political faction within the broader religious community. Saleh was replaced by a Sunni from the south, Hadi, who had been Saleh's vice president at the behest of the Saudis, who were and the Houthis were critical of the process and of Hadi. So basically, they're like, wait a second, why are you installing this fucking guy who doesn't represent our interests, who doesn't want to represent our interests?
Right.
And why are you manipulating our fucking election? Like, why are you installing this puppet government, basically? And I'm sure that was coordinated with the US. I have no doubt. So then they started colluding against with Saleh against Hadi secretly. A remarkable hypocritical reversal of alliances. Again, they're a political faction trying to find their footing. That shit happens. It's the Game of Thrones, right? It was and much of the army remained loyal to Saleh and his family, and so together with the Houthis, the two had a preponderance of force in the country. Hadi was deeply, scroll down, unpopular and seen as a Saudi stooge. Yeah, he was a fucking puppet governor.
Yep.
The Houthis opened direct civilian air traffic control between Sana'a and Tehran. Iran promised cheap oil for Yemen, and rumors of more Iran-Houthi cooperation spread quickly. So they said, okay, cool. You captured, like, you've proven yourself to be a legitimate political faction that's capable of controlling part of the country, right? And so they're like, we'll fucking work with you. Because they're looking for some kind of government to work with.
Mm-hmm. Someone to sell their shit to.
What's that?
Someone to sell their shit to, basically.
Yeah, they need, especially because they are sanctioned and unable to sell their shit to many people.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what we did with sanctions, is drive the people our country said were our enemies, which I don't think should be our enemies at all. In anything, the U.S. is an enemy to peace. And yeah, there you go. So anyway, this was the Civil War. You can scroll down, but basically, like, the Yemeni Civil War happened.
Yeah.
They won. The U.S. was facilitating arms sales to the Saudis, who were using, like, illegal weapons and other things, and they still fucking won. And here they are, a faction being like, we're against the kleptocracy and against the puppet regimes, and we want our country, we want our countrymen to have a right and a say in their government. Or alternatively, we want to impose our own fucking government, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still a legitimate political actor in the broadest sense of, like, what we think of in terms of politics. Obama back to Saudis. You can scroll. We don't need to talk about a lot of this because we're already fucking out of time. Keep scrolling. Yeah, there you go. There's the few million a month versus 6 billion. You missed that part. And this is an older article, by the way. This is from 2017.
Yeah.
So that's why you're like, wait a second, they're playing with fire. So they didn't. And it said, oh, there will be pressure for retaliation against Iran will be significant. The Trump administration is poorly designed to provide cooling counsel. And Trump is now pointing out, hey, we weren't on the brink of fucking World War III when I was president. And it fucking sticks, dude. It fucking sticks. And it's really shitty because he was not a stabilizing force in global politics. In fact, you can say a lot of the shit he did, as we've said it already here, he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which fucked that up. And he moved the capital to Jerusalem. So from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to throw a fucking, I don't know, big fuck you to basically anybody who didn't think that it was a holy war or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to listen to finish out on a clip from Max Blumenthal, who actually is a journalist, and actually went to the source instead of, like, where I'm searching along and what I'm finding in the algorithm, because maybe I'm not that proficient at using the internet. I found it very difficult to find facts and find real, true information. I thought the Brookings Institute did a fine job of summarizing everything that had happened and who they were, and kind of the history of why they existed at all.
Mhm.
But here, for their motivation for attacking shipping lanes and threatening, really, I don't think it's going to fucking destroy the industrial economy, the global industrial economy, because I think that that's part of the reason the U.S. is there. They're part of the reason China's moving. I don't know if I'm not convinced if the U.S. isn't in part like fueling this, and it's not Houthis. It's like some other CIA-backed group that's attacking ships so that they can put in the press that the Houthis are attacking ships and Iran's backing the Houthis so we can go to war with Iran, but also so we can have a permanent presence in the fucking Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and basically control the Suez Canal so that we can take that oil and bring it to where we want to use it, take that energy, and also not just extract from that region, but also prevent China. Because we're like, how do we stay on top? Because for whatever reason, like the existence of the poor is our ability to like live a dignified life is certainly less important than like the proverbial dick measuring contest of all the fucking world's elites. Right? Because that's all that is. It's like we want to be bigger. Our economy's got to be bigger than China's because we can't let them fucking little peckered fucking slant-eyed sons of bitches be richer than us. Because that's what it boils down to. Like, I fucking hate to put it in such fucking vulgar terms, but like,
don't forget commies too.
Oh, and then fucking the godless commies. The godless commies and the tiny pricked fucking slanty eye peoples can't be richer than us. It's fucking bro, like we're literally controlled by like enough. Let's listen to Max Blumenthal, has enough integrity to actually ask a spokesperson for the organization rather than being like, I ran back to the militias are just trying to fucking make shit really hard for us because Iran hates us and we should go fucking nuke Iran. Like, because that's what they're talking about doing. Like, because there's no way to win a conventional war with Iran, which we've discussed here before. We can go into deeper detail. I mean, there's no way to win a conventional war, but it would cost so much blood and treasure. It would bankrupt us more than we're already bankrupt, if that makes sense. So anyway, here is Max Blumenthal and a spokesperson from Ansar Allah to tell us why they do what they do, free and clear of U.S. propaganda.
The Ansar Allah movement controls the majority of Yemen after fending off
I think it might be muted.
U.S. and UK-backed military campaign.
No. Let's see here. No, it should be good. Volume up.
Led by Saudi Arabia.
Don't hear him.
After Israel began its blood-stained assault on the besieged Gaza Strip this October, Ansar Allah, known popularly as the Houthis, enacted a naval blockade targeting Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea as a means of putting pressure on Israel to end its attack on Gaza. The Biden administration responded with attacks of its own, striking targets across Yemen.
Yemen working. Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
Just days before the Biden administration announced plans to add Ansar Allah once again to the State Department's list of terrorist organizations and issued its intent to escalate military attacks on Yemen, I spoke to Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, a senior political officer and spokesman for the Ansar Allah movement. Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, welcome to the Gray Zone. What are your military objectives with this naval blockade in the Red Sea, and how do you intend to achieve them against some of the most powerful militaries on the planet?
In the name of God, the All-Merciful, our goal is a simple one: to stop the genocide that is happening in Gaza, and to help get fuel, food, and medicine into Gaza. And we have suffered a similar plight starting in 2015 till today as the Yemeni people. We suffered equally from strikes and a siege. That's why we cannot allow these crimes to be repeated. And of course, if any other group had been suffering what the Palestinians are suffering now, we would have equally supported them. Therefore, our position is a moral one, and our war is a war of morality. As for the massive difference in military strength between Yemen and our enemies, Israel, the United States, and the United Kingdom, we don't act based on our internal strength, but rather based on the support of God the Almighty. And everyone knows that Moses, peace be upon him, had triumphed over Pharaoh with a stick. As we know the story of Suleiman's victory, and the story of David's slingshot that defeated Goliath. Therefore, we don't fear but God Almighty, and we don't fear the weapons of the enemy, whatever they may be.
That must be some really good Kool-Aid.
I don't know. I honestly don't think I'm nearly as offended by religious people. I'm offended by Christian fascists. I don't want to live under in a Christian fascist dystopia, but that is probably most likely our future. Let's be fucking real about it. We're not ready. I think we've said multiple times on the show, but like we're not ready, and we could love to fucking debate that. How about that, folks? If we get three people to chime in into the comment section being like, hey, set up a Discord conversation because I want to prove your ass wrong, you're an idiot, then fucking do that. Please. I would love to be told that, like, no fascists, like the left is going to fucking win in a political struggle here. They're not. So then who is the faction that emerges from the chaos of the disintegration of the American state? It'll probably be someone who's like, you know, God is great, fucking death to Bud Light and fucking trans kids playing sports or whatever. Like, you know, like just some absurd shit. At any rate, I do think it's really important that you hear from them. And honestly, like some of it is like, I don't know the language. And so that might be as close to a direct translation as possible. But what are the cultural subtexts behind that language? Like if I said, I believe communism, I believe in the project of communism, not necessarily the communisms we have seen. Right? Mm-hmm. Like I believe in the central core philosophical tenets of that idea. Right? That might get fucking translated in a very similar way. Like, I believe in the principles of our fucking mission.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have no idea. I don't know the language, and I can't pretend that I do.
Well, I mean, it also seems like there's certain... it kind of reminds me of the episode of Star Trek where they have the aliens that, like, speak in memes, basically, you know? Like he said, you know, as you know, Moses, you know, turned the staff and, you know, defeated Pharaoh, and as this and as that, you know, it's like a very, like, you know, full of, like, you know, memes and imagery just in the day-to-day speech. And so, like, when you're in that culture, it means so much more, I imagine, than someone from the outside. Like if you don't know any of the stories, just like, okay, I can kind of gather what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much, and that's the thing, is so difficult sometimes to communicate, especially when you don't understand a culture and a language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's really one of the ways. Do you want to play the music?
Yeah, sure.
I really do think it's one of the ways that the propaganda apparatus exploits the ignorance of the masses. And I don't want to say ignorance in as a pejorative. I don't think people don't want to know more. I don't think we're really provided the tools more. And there's only so much time in a day. And I also think we're flooded with distractions.
Too much data. And Valheim.
Valheim. But I mean, I obviously think of these things and play Valheim. So you say you can't play Valheim.
Oh, no. I'm just saying, like, you know, there's distractions and then there's, you know, other distractions. It's
It's completely legitimate distraction. And I'll freely admit, it's why I'm not fucking hip to the news. I really enjoy this shit. I kind of almost do the podcast, I clearly do the podcast for nobody but myself and to hang out with you because we're not doing it for anybody else.
No.
Although I've been trying to connect with some folks that have been doing stuff and have bigger audiences because I'm like, I don't know. I think we have valuable stuff. And I think that getting some solid feedback would be really good. Like actual feedback from people who watch a lot of YouTube and be like, this, I would change this because I was like hearing what you were saying. And then this kind of happened. And then we can be a lot more conscious of it. Because we do weave a lot of personal into this, which is like, if you know people for like, you've been like watching them for a very long time and they do a live stream and then they bring up some personal stuff, you can kind of connect some dots.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. At any rate, we're going to continue to chug along. We're going to see a Wednesday where we get to actually hit on a bunch of news items. We're in early development for a shorter clip show that'll cover news stuff more regularly, but be like significantly shorter. And honestly, I really like the hour format. I feel like it's fucking perfect.
Yeah. I don't know how people could do 3 hours.
Yeah, and a lot of people do. And then they clip that down and they have a ton of watchers. And I used to watch 3-hour live streams.
Yeah, me
and
too.
then I realized,
when I
like,
had a
wait a
job.
second, like, y'all aren't fucking well read, especially, and I've said this before too, especially on foreign policy. It's like, you are not well read enough to fucking offer a valuable opinion on this. You basically are like, US evil, everybody else is right. And I'm like, I would not throw my weight behind that person. That's why I consistently said they are a legitimate political faction in a conflict in that country based on their own cultural and historical context. Like, I'm not denying their legitimacy. I'm not propagandizing against their legitimacy, calling them terrorists or anything. But I'm also not going to be like, they are right. Right? Russia is right in this case because it's pretty fucking transparent. But when you get into outside of like culture and a geography that I don't know very well and a history that I don't know very well, because of course, what do we teach in our institutions? We teach fucking white people.
Western culture. That's
Western
right,
civilization.
That's right,
The core of your history degree is 3 classes, undergraduate seminars, Western Civ. Western Civ until 1350. Western Civ, which is all antiquity and like Middle Ages and shit in Europe, and then from 1350 to like 1850, and then 1850 to present. Yeah, you take 2 classes on like 600 years of Western history, and then you have to take like a diversity standard one, right? Like, and I wound up taking China once and I failed the class. I didn't want to do the final paper. Dude, I was such a piece of shit student. It's why I have not committed to go back to school, even though I keep waffling. And I'm like, I got money. It'll pay me money to go to school. I should probably get that money. And then I'm like, I really don't want to go back to school.
Yeah, but can't you just like, do the cool thing where you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this major and then bloop.
Well, I could keep going to the junior college and keep switching majors.
Do it. It's fun.
Nah, I should pursue a fucking another graduate degree and at least do something that's more meaningful.
What's that going to do? Who's that going to impress?
Nobody, but if I do it right, we do have an anthropology department that has several people who specialize in like documentary filmmaking and shit.
Oh.
And I could get behind that. Because that's kind of what I try to do with the podcast. Is just editorialize, but also like try and take. It's not just about me editorializing, because my opinion is like, I mean, it's more valid than a lot of other people's opinions because like I have an analytical and critical mind, and also I'm fairly well read on a lot of subjects. And I'll be free to say, I don't know. I don't know their language. I don't know their culture. Is that a translation that accurately captures what that individual is trying to convey? I will freely say, nope, I don't know. I will not say either way because I have no fucking clue. So try and take it with a little dose of humility, which would be nice if the U.S. did that with their foreign policy, and they're spending $113 billion on Ukraine just so they could lose to some fucking well-fortified trenches. Classic technique stands the test of time. And with that, we'd like to remind you, this has been With Thunder's Applause, a podcast where two friends talk shit about the condition of a shitty world. And we like to remind you that when liberty dies, it dies with thunderous applause. Bye-bye now.
Later, y'all.